Hello everyone, welcome to today's Daily Sib. Apologies I wasn't live yesterday. As I mentioned on my social media, the guest was unwell and it wasn't possible to get someone in at the last second. So yeah, we had a day off yesterday, but back and raring to go today. Really excited to have another chat with a fellow entrepreneur. So thank you for joining me today, Guy.
Absolute pleasure, really good to be here.
I know, yeah, let's just get kicked off. If you could give a bit of your backstory and some of the key landmark moments, and then we'll have a good old Daily Sib chat about it all.
Great. Well, so I'm a paraplegic. I had an accident in 2003 up in Sheffield, and so I'm a full-time wheelchair user, which is how I've come to this space.
Yeah.
And I've had a pretty eclectic background, actually. A few years ago, someone gave me this wonderful expression of portfolio career, and I was enormously grateful to them because, having felt like a jack of all trades beforehand, suddenly I felt like I had a focus. And so now I'm kind of starting to bring those experiences together, but I've generally worked either for myself or consulted for other people. In 2008, I started a website, disabledgear.com, because I felt there was a real inequality of opportunity. The equipment.
What was that? Sorry, go disabled.
Disabledgear.com.
Yeah, G-E-A-R, yeah.
G-E-A-R. I passed it on in 2013. But I felt, when I was looking after myself with exercise equipment or just kind of maintaining stuff, I realized that this equipment was very expensive and lots of people who would really benefit from it weren't able to access that secondhand market. Yeah. So at the time, I set up this kind of free ads website. I ran it as a business so that that part of it, which I wanted to exist, could be free. And I didn't want to run it as a charity. I didn't want to be, I wanted it to be sustainable, and I didn't want to be begging for money. And that worked well for a time. When I passed it on, I think technically it was and image-wise it was a bit out of date, but it was a very good experience, and it meant that I had interaction with a lot of people with just different disabilities, which was interesting. Getting different life stories, different conditions, and understanding that disability really. It's used as this defining label so much, but it really isn't a label that should define us in a way that we can be men or we can be women, we can be, any of these other things. And there's these different approaches and attitudes within the industry. So it was enormously helpful and interesting.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, that's cool. So I mean, there's definitely a few bits I'd like to go in on Disabled Gear, but in terms of, and we'll get onto the current venture a bit later as well, but you mentioned a few sort of portfolio careers. So what other areas have you touched upon in more broad terms?
So in broad terms, property's been a defining feature. I've done that. I've come at it from a lot of different angles. So originally, before my accident, in agency, in both buying and selling sides of it, development and refurbishment, and that's been on both residential and commercial, and again, interesting to see the differences between there. Sort of on investment side things, again, here in the UK, but also really interestingly in East Germany. In 2006, I had a spell in Leipzig.
I've been to Leipzig a few times in the past.
Yeah, it's a cool city, and funny enough, it really reminds me of Sheffield. It has that kind of scruffy around the edges, but very friendly, has absolutely everything you could possibly want, and access to some really beautiful land outside. So did
you say it was in 2006 you were there?
Well, I'm trying to think. Yeah, it was about 2006, and I was managing these flats for about 5 years. I mean, I was based here and sort of
going over. Yeah,
you know it.
Well, so when I was at uni, a lot of the care team were more volunteers that did a sort of social year abroad from other countries. And a load of them were guys from Germany. Instead of going in the army, they did a social year, and so quite a few of the carers / friends they became were German, and one in particular who I'm still friends with today was from Leipzig. And in 2006, with my other mate from in a wheelchair, we went for the world. We didn't see a game in the ground, but it was the World Cup that was in Germany in 2006.
Yeah.
So we were watching a load of the football while being in Leipzig during that time.
It must have been 2006, because now you mentioned the football, I do remember being out there and all the bars, everyone watching all the games.
Yeah. I think Holland played a match at that stadium at Leipzig, and so the whole city was dressed in orange for a day because of the Dutch fans. So interesting. No, a very nice place. You were essentially, was that for yourself managing?
Yeah, absolutely, and it was a real learning curve. I was post injury, and things in. I had been up in Sheffield, and I'd looked at the market then and thought, gosh, either everyone knows something I don't, or these values are getting very toppy. Like I couldn't justify the prices that people were asking. And so I decided, I was a relatively new injury. And so I was still working out, not just, how my body worked, all my emotional stuff, but, how I was going to make a living. And if I had too much debt and if things went wrong, it was a new world for me. And I felt that what I needed was something less risky, more stable. And at the same time, I think, Portugal and Spain were having a hard time with their economies, and the EU was looking unstable. And I had this real thing that Germany was this, it was a very safe place. So in terms of where the euro was at the moment, at that time, and if everything broke up, Germany would still be a safe bet. But actually what I learned there was how the rental market can function really well. So, property in this country is a huge cultural thing. And, there are so many people who are just priced out of it. And I have a real issue with how we run things, because in the same way that disabled gear for me was about equality of opportunity for equipment and just being able to maintain basic health, housing is a basic need. And what people need, is security of tenure. They need to have some autonomy over their own housing. So they need to be able to feel that, look, they've got a space, they've found it, they can make it theirs, they can have control over it and not feel like they're either going to be priced out of it or it's going to be whipped away from under them, because that has a very detrimental effect to families and relationships and work and mental health and everything else. And Germany, for me, it showed me how there were rules to help both sides, and I couldn't just go into someone's flat and say, right, I want to have a look around, I want to put the prices up or whatever. There were very strict rules governing that. But equally, they couldn't just leave the place a mess or stop paying their rent, because that was also very controlled. And so this balance of power was very balanced until one side didn't keep up the agreement. And so, it was a useful learning curve, and it just made me realize that actually it's not so much social. Well, it's social, but it's respectful, and the long-term relationships can be beneficial to both sides if it works.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because when you look at entrepreneurship and capitalism and business, there's quite often a general sentiment that it's about free market to the most extreme, because that's where everything, demand and supply finds its equilibrium and everything goes from there. But actually you're sort of talking about that it's almost some regulation in a way, is what I'm hearing, that there are some regulations meant that both sides had less risk, which meant it worked better for both sides as well.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know whether we're governed by fear in this country. You know, if you're running a business or you're running a kind of investment, you have to be seen to make so much money or be so kind of controlling, because that shows strength. And I don't know, maybe for me, it's the opposite. It's being able to let go and understand what good might, or what healthy might look like. So, you know, the whole, we need to do right in the short term, but we also need to do right in the long term. And I think that being right by people actually, well, it's proven in lots of businesses, you know, that are looking at social and economic models or environmental issues. The long-term impacts of it come back both socially but also financially. So it's about being, I think, responsible and respectful. And you know, there's plenty to go round. But if we can do it on a much more stable background, then actually that puts a business on a stable footing. So if I have a property and I look after it properly and I treat the tenant with respect, and they know that it's their property for as long as they need it, as long as they pay the rent, then actually, you know, say they're there for 25 years, that's a dream. It's perfect. It means they have stability, but it means that I don't be worrying about all the business every time someone leaves, and I've got to refresh a place after, you know, get the agency fees, have the worry of the unknown of a new set of people coming in, and they don't know me and I don't know them. So stability for me is all part of it, and that's successful financially in business as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've not got so much experience around you know, property and to the depth that you're talking, but everything you're saying very much applies to what I have been working around, you know, employing more disabled people. So as a business, if you are more open to who you recruit and taking away barriers that prohibit certain groups of people from applying, and also retention of disabled staff, looking at how you have workplace adjustments, overcoming barriers and being more productive, it's very parallel to what you just said, that you look after your staff and you have diverse staff, business is better. And same with products and services. If everybody can access products and services in the social inclusion sense, again, you have the business benefit from it. So it's quite interesting that the same goes in the property sector as well.
I think it goes in all sectors, but it's really interesting. It's really interesting to hear you talk about workplace adjustments. I recently read Kate Nash has made her book Secrets and Big News available free, and it's fascinating to talk about what we're trying to achieve and how we achieve it. And I think it's really understanding the process and the kind of the human fears and drivers behind, you know, what we're trying to achieve.
Agreed. So you mentioned disabled gear and the sort of work you did around property. Are there any other sort of sectors or key experiences that bring you up to what you're doing now?
Yes, I kept being drawn, funny enough, into very marketing-y type stuff. So working with different companies to either look at, you know, their branding or their kind of proposition, or working on a few random projects thrown in there. A robotics guy who's wanting to develop an exoskeleton, and that's always really interesting. And you'll know this with your new agency, that when non-disabled people come to a business that's about disability, and the assumptions they make about what we must want or what we must need, and it comes back to this thing of labeling. It's actually, just because I'm disabled doesn't mean I am one thing or another. It's just, you know, it's part of me.
That's the labels. We get why as a species we have to label to be able to remember and know what our framework of the world is, but the problem of labels is exactly that they are generalizations, and they're not.
Yeah.
You can't apply one size fits all for any community. And I was chatting to Baroness Campbell on the show a couple of weeks ago about campaigning and how we make change, whether it's business or government or any other area of life. And she said it's about unifying the voice of disabled people, but that's a challenge because you're going to have different political allegiances, you're going to have different lifestyle preferences, and so it is but it's the same as any market. If you talk about parents or you talk about people in the gaming community, it's good to know there are communities and there is a commonality, but equally there's a lot of different views and opinions.
Totally, and lots of people who are living with a disability do not want to be, identify as having a disability.
Yeah.
So it's interesting working within this industry. Is how do you reach all these people? Because it's not like you can lump them in or lump us in one group and say, great, well, we're just going to target you there. It's a perennial problem, I think.
Yes.
Problem, not a problem.
And so one more thought I really have about your backstory and all the work you've done was around the disabled gear venture. Because you said that there was there's a free side, but there was a business model. So what was the business model to that?
Well, I suppose there are two bits to that. There's what I did and there's what I could have done, or where I'll say now that I got to a point in 2013, actually probably it took me longer to get there than I should. But it needed, in order to grow it further, it needed proper investment. And I had to look and decide, do I want to do that? Do I want to, borrow this funding to do it, or which is why I sold it on. But essentially, I sold a load of new products on it, and they were fairly niche. They weren't things that other people were doing. So I brought over to the UK the Rolitex wheelchair jeans, which were an amazing product, and I had a really nice relationship with the manufacturers or the company who started those.
Could you just explain a bit more what the product was?
Yeah, they're great. So I saw them in a trade fair in Germany, and that's where I found them. Essentially, they're jeans. They're a premium brand jean. They're made in the same factories as Levi, True Religion, a load of other premium brand jeans. And in some cases using very similar, if not the same, materials. But they had a number of key differences, and so they're cut higher at the back. So when you're sitting down, they don't slide down your backside. They are longer in the leg, so when you're sitting down, you can't see the sock gap. You've got a longer fly, so that if you catheterize, it makes it much easier.
Or use a bottle as well.
Accessibility. And clever little details. The guy who set it up is a tetraplegic, and so the front belt loops were sewn slightly closer to the fastener, and the fastener, rather than being a button or whatever, it was a catch. So he put his fingers in the belt loop, and using his minimal dexterity, kind of fasten and unfasten independently. The belt loops were sewn on with nylon, not cotton. Now that means that a lot of people in wheelchairs will know that they've snapped the belt loops or torn the jeans around the belt loops just by hoiking themselves up, and these were much stronger, so that didn't happen. No pockets, no studs on the back, so there weren't the pressure issues, and that back seam was a flat seam, right? So it's sewn side to side rather than over and under. But very clever stuff. But the beauty of it, if I mentioned them and someone said, "Oh, right," and they'd look at me wearing these jeans and say, "Well, what's different?" And my point was, well, exactly. And beautifully, pricing. I heard on one of your calls the other day, someone was talking about pricing, and this was the only product I could think of where as a disability product cost less than the mainstream version. Although they were they were expensive. If you're used to buying, if you need to buy jeans at a real budget level, they weren't those. But they're made in they're equivalent to Levi, and they had more handwork in the making of them, and yet they cost less than a pair of Levi's.
By the way, I've got a pair, just to mention. I have got the jeans you're talking about. I think I bought them direct from Germany, and they shipped them. And it wasn't some massively thought through process on my part, other than I just found them and purchased direct. But yeah, they are amazing. They're really comfortable.
Oh, great. Well, I worked directly with them even after I sold Disabled Gear, I kept working with them for a number of years. I'm guessing you must have bought those in about the last 3 years, because because they got to a point. I think they were worried about their finances, like every business, and they wanted to take it all in house. And so but before that, I was handling all the kind of global sales for English speaking countries.
Right.
So I was getting orders from Australia and Sweden and Israel and all over.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when you said there was a free part, so was that about products, but it was sort of reviews and information, and there was no element of selling, but then there was a shop where there were products that you've actually sold?
Yeah, so the only thing, I've always valued my independence, and I valued my credibility and reputation. So I never, if I had any dealings with any other companies outside of the shop, then it was to write about them in an impartial way. And the it has this information section on the website, which I set up, and that all started when I was looking for a hand bike for myself. And back in the day, there wasn't really any information or comparisons all in one place. You had to go to the manufacturer's websites, and even there it wasn't quite clear. So I said, I thought, look, I'm doing this research, and I'll do it. And so I put down everything I could find, and that page, in terms of search engine optimization, taught me a lot back in 2008. Because even though we didn't sell or make hand bikes for years and years, we had that top slot, that top organic slot with Google for hand bikes or hand cycles, and that, I think, it was just about the value of the information and the impartiality. Like, if you had something to do, I listed everything, and I like that. I like that I can be impartial.
So it's sort of a publishing journalistic arm, as you say, which was free and very much about adding value to the community. And then there was a product side, which absolutely still adds value to the community, but it was also a way of creating some revenue to cover your costs.
Yes, totally. And now, when I look at what my next steps would have been, and I did talk with the new owners who've subsequently sold on their business, which included this website again, to multi-million pound organization. Nothing's happened with it so far. It's kind of gone a bit backwards. I would love something to happen with it, obviously.
That's always the hard part, when the reasons to sell are always very clear, but then you can't help what happens to it afterwards.
Yes, it's not that I feel sentimental about it as such. It's that it feels like a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, it's the good it could have done. Yeah.
And if free ads is a vulnerable space anyway, it needs to work, because free ads can get spammed to death. And we're talking about some potentially very vulnerable people, and I had a very close eye on it to make sure that didn't happen, or where it was happening, to jump on it immediately. And there's technology to do it. It just needs a bit of financial input. We'll see.
Sure. No, it's very interesting to hear. Sort of the ins and outs of the publishing and shop world. I mean, Duncan introduced us, right?
Duncan's been a good friend for many years.
Yeah, and for people watching, Duncan has partnered with Disability Horizons. Disability Horizons is the magazine I co-founded, so it's a lot more of the sort of articles by the community for the community. But then with Duncan's assistance, we've been starting to sell a small range of products that we feel, as we've just said here, Guy, add value and help, disabled people's lives. And that balance of affordable, stylish, and practical, it's sort of, that's the sweet spot that we're all aiming for. But you often get, there's the design, but they don't, like jeans, you normally get, they look great, but they just don't feel comfortable. We talked about the solution with the Rolodex one. So it's a really interesting space. So where are you at now? What's the convergence? And sort of Steve Jobs says how it's only when you look back you see how everything made sense and the dots join. So what are you up to now then?
That's so interesting. That is where I feel I'm at, starting to pull these different things.
Yeah.
So the last few years has very much been about property and disability, but I've reached a point. I'm going to run ahead with myself. We had the opportunity to self-build a few years back, which was incredible, and we were very lucky with our design team that we wanted to build something that was sustainable, and we ended up building a straw bale house, but clashing two cultures or colliding, one being natural, healthy materials, and two being an understanding of energy efficiencies and health and warmth and some of the great things in property. So for me, I was going through this process and looking at it from behind, in retrospect, realizing that in terms of housing, we silo all these housing issues, by which I mean, maybe we have to build accessible housing, or maybe we have to build affordable housing, or maybe we have to build, and for me that doesn't make sense to silo them. We're just building in problems for later on. What we need to do is look at design, and when we think about design, we need to design around humans and how we live, and as well as the environment. But actually, if we look after how we, humans, then a lot of the environmental stuff also gets taken care of. So having done that and seen the benefits of how a really good architect can design a really wonderful space to live in. Last year, I then had a really interesting role for a London accessible property fund called Abode Impact. And this was a new kind of project. It was a real social impact project. We wanted to take advantage of London's planning legislation. So they have made mandatory planning legislation that exists, but is optional, whereby 10% of new build has to be built to wheelchair accessible or adaptable standards. And we did a load of research to show, and there's lots of research actually to show the demand. So what we wanted to do was to buy a load of flats that would be wheelchair accessible and rent them out to wheelchair users. And that...
I can vouch. When I lived in London, I was just out of uni. I wanted to rent. I had no means to buy, and it was bloody difficult.
It is very difficult, and there are so many gaps. Although there's intention in all sorts of places, there are these missing links, and Abode Impact really wanted to address these. It was a fabulous team and a really good project. We had some very good relationships, through the industry and more widely. That isn't off the ground at the moment, though. It's still in the offing. And when I worked there, I was just seeing all these missing links the issues one has in scaling up and making these things available to more people. So where I'm at the moment with Accessible PRS is continuing to address those issues. For me, I'm at the moment more and more. I really want to reframe the narrative so that we're not just talking about accessible, but we're talking about inclusive. And when we talk about inclusive, understanding what we mean by it, who we're including, and who benefits. And the answer is, everyone at some stage. But we benefit on an individual basis, on an occupant basis. We benefit on a commercial basis, because whether you're buying for yourself or whether you're a landlord or an investor, there are all sorts of benefits, financial. And as a government, we're wasting money on a lot of social problems. Mental health is chronically under-resourced, and I see that in another role I do. And all this comes down to good design. Like, if we could put in place some standards. Well, the problem with standards is we have these benchmarks, but the benchmarks are like a minimum standard, and on a lot of properties we're failing to meet that minimum standard. And really, I think it's really exciting to start aiming for like these benchmark standards, because they're not always more expensive to do, or if they're expensive in the capital initially, then there are savings along, in terms of servicing, maintenance, running, all sorts of things. So in some ways, if I'm talking about a portfolio landlord, having a load of really efficient, really well-designed homes, if you plan to keep that for a generation, then as the years go by, the profits are greater and greater without any greater cost to the occupants. So it's really exciting stuff once you start bringing all these different elements together, and not just looking at accessibility, but for me, accessibility is so important because, God, we've got so much. There's so many good bits of research on this. LSE and Habenteg did this great piece of research a couple of years ago, and they talked about the 1.8 million people in the UK with unmet accessible housing needs. Aspire did some fabulous research with under the Freedom of Information Act, going to all the local authorities and asking them, one, how many wheelchair users they've got on their waiting list, and two, how many wheelchair accessible properties they've got in their stock, and working out how long these waiting lists are effectively. And it's a chronic problem. So why aren't we addressing it? And how we are addressing it at the moment is a bit of stick, and it's a bit of, you've got to do this. But it doesn't make sense to me. It's like, are you kidding me? This is an incredible opportunity for everyone. Like you want to do this. This is something that's totally in your interest to do. And so the conversations I love having are with businesses who hadn't considered it. And if I have a talk I do, and it's about making it relevant. It's about allowing people to see the relevance to them, even though it doesn't seem relevant. So I spoke to a co-housing group down here recently, and mostly they were young families, a few people reaching retirement sort of age. And once the penny dropped, you could see this kind of eureka moment. It's like, wow, we want this. This is going to benefit us in terms of good design. And so I guess the hardest group to reach are maybe developers who are quite short term in their focus. They're still the conversations I love having, and I know that I'm getting used to blank looks and slightly awkward silences, and I think I'm challenging people on my concept, because even wheelchair users have got used to thinking of ourselves as this niche group who are somehow have these special needs, rather than saying, no, like, your needs benefit everyone. And if you put a 300 mil nib beside a door so that it's easier when you're in a wheelchair to flow through, then someone without, who's not using a wheelchair will come through, and they'll come through that door, and they'll feel good because they'll feel space and light, and that can affect impact positively in so many other ways. So it's a really interesting space at the moment, and I'm kind of just getting started.
Yeah, that's very exciting. It was classic universal and inclusive design, isn't it? That if you design for people with more particular or extreme needs, you generally make it better for everyone. So I think that's a great use case of the general theory of universal design. And so obviously you talked about the sort of bigger picture that if you design with more people, particularly disabled people, in mind, the benefits are there. It might cost a little bit more in the shorter term in terms of getting that off the ground, but actually there are bigger returns in the longer run for different reasons. When you sort of mention like local authorities, I think when we look at public funding, it's very hard to sell a longer term view because we're within general election cycles and more just generally it's short term budgets and for different reasons. But what it sounds like you're unlocking is the potential of the private sector. If they understand the opportunity and the returns, then it's their money that can be unlocked to make this happen, but also it's just a win-win-win in the end, right?
Totally. And this is why I felt so strongly and enjoyed the work with Abode Impact, because they were pioneering in terms of the space, and which is a hard thing to do, and it's why they're not off the ground yet. But the learnings from success means that everyone else can pile in. They can feel sure. You know, people are always concerned to put their money into something new. And yeah, if someone's done it and it's proven to be successful,
yeah, it's the really, first one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really easy to follow up. And so very much for me, I have visions, I have grand plans, but for me, I'm quite happy to start small. I'm quite happy to prove concepts and work in a very rational, sane way, and just build it case by case. It's a win-win-win all round, as you said.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Just to have a quick look around some of the comments. So George Will Therese Otaki on Facebook is saying, hi, I'm watching now, so hello there. On Twitter, Periscope, Youth Map says, really interesting discussion. Thank you both. So nice.
Thank you very
positive
much.
Engagement. And I've started streaming to Twitch, which is a gaming platform, but there's a lot on there around different topics and conversations. Very, we're very much suitable there as well. And Fake Smile 12 is the username, said hi, and that they're from Italy, so we're actually engaging with someone from Italy, which is quite cool.
Excellent. Well, they've got the same issues that we've got.
Exactly, universal, right? And then familiar face on Periscope. Duncan,
yeah,
this makes total sense and needs to be heard widely. So that's partly what we're trying to achieve today, to spread awareness more. And obviously, Duncan's very in tune with what we're talking about himself as well.
Yeah,
so good to see you on the live there, Duncan. So it sounds like really exciting. You say you're doing lots of awareness raising and giving talks to different groups, and sometimes you get blank stares. I know that one too well from some of the domains that I'm trying to change and raise awareness.
It's a good sign, though. I really see it as positive. If we're trying to create change, it takes a little while for things to sink in. I remember when iPads first came out, and I didn't get it. I remember looking at them and thinking, what's the point of that? And I wasn't alone. And look at the ubiquity now.
Just take, like you say, first adopter, early adopter. That's your point about that first use case, isn't it? That shows everyone else what it is, how it works, what the benefits are. And once you've got that first domino falling, the rest will go afterwards.
I think it makes sense. I get those early. What I struggle to do is give an elevator pitch, which allows for a crash of pennies within 2 minutes or whatever. If I can have a 20-minute conversation with someone, by the end of it, they're almost ahead of me in terms of saying what I might be saying. People get it. It makes a lot of sense. what, if I think about who inclusivity includes, well, it includes families, with young children. It includes people who are struggling with mental health, mental ill health, and living in, frankly, unsuitable accommodation. Look at biking and e-cycles. They're heavy. We need to be able to get them safely tucked away within houses and flats. We're including a lot of people that we wouldn't necessarily think. By 2036, I think the stat is in the UK, 1 in 4 people will be over the age of 65. These are going to be huge challenges, and I feel that the market is starting to think about this. What I want to do is speed that up. What I want to do is be central to a conversation, so that if someone says, great, okay, we need accessibility, but they're going to start pouring in unhealthy materials, I'm like, okay, we can do accessibility. That's a given, but you want to be building like that? Can I introduce you to some people who've just got incredible knowledge in this space? And some of the buildings, I saw this incredible building in Frankfurt, which I think is probably my favorite building. It was built like 25 years ago by someone who only does sustainable architecture. But essentially, there's a kind of a massive entrance lobby, which is almost like a greenhouse, but it doesn't get over hot because it's planted up and it's got running water. I was amazed that I could go up 5 stories in my wheelchair without using a lift. It just flows up through the atrium, and I didn't even think about it at first. It didn't feel like an accessible route. It wasn't until I was at the top, it was like, hey, wow, I've never done that before. And the building was so full of all these incredible environmental things, which were kind of healing this filthy area that had been chosen and built in. Sorry, I can get carried away with.
No, a lot of passion. That's great. There's a question. Can you send me a link to share with a friend who runs a housing association, please? And then it's Sarah at plainsailingmotivation.co.uk. Guy, that's from Twitter. So if you go after we've finished talking on the Twitter thread, you can pick up with Sarah at Youth Maps afterwards.
Okay, that would be great. Is it possible? Can I share my own?
Of course, 100%. Yeah, share it now.
So my own website is accessibleprs.co.uk. So PRS standing for private rented sector.
Right.
And on there, what I'm looking for at the moment is wheelchair users who are looking to rent to sign up. That helps me evolve the conversation with investors. So I'm talking with a few people at the moment who totally get the problem and are really interested, want to get involved, and it's a very tenant-centric process. So rather than having properties and trying to match the tenants, we're working from the other way around. So if we have people, it doesn't matter where you are in the country, what we want to do is effectively buy for you, and you know better or best what you need or where you're living or the areas or the budgets. So it's an interesting conversation, and it really is two-way. But I need people to sign up. So
cool. No, it sounds good. One question I had about the sort of venture was from your side. Are you contracted to support the investors, or do you how does it work on the business model for you?
So it's all still in play. Like it's
working itself out. Yeah.
Essentially, it's about. There's a figure which people are happy. There has, for me, it's about finding a balance. Like I see myself as a facilitator.
Yeah.
I know the issues on both sides. Like I know the commercial needs of people in property. I have my own kind of loves and passions about what property can be, the opportunities it can give people to live their best lives.
Yeah.
And I know from being a wheelchair user that the needs we have and the specifics of design. So effectively, I'm trying to put together a portfolio of rental properties, and it can be it can be done anyway. So if you're a landlord and wanting to expand, then we can have a conversation, and that conversation is completely separate to everything else.
Yeah.
If you're an investor running a fund and you want to allocate a percentage of your fund to accessible housing, or you want to run a separate fund, then we can, the conversations are different.
Yeah.
So I can't sit here and say I have one way of doing it.
No, of course not.
I'm a consultant in effect.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is make sure that we use knowledge and property to help people, and that's both sides, to help people find a home that's stable, and to help investors invest in something that's for the long term, that does well for them, because if it's sustainable, then they'll want to do more of it. We've got 1.8 million people in this country at the moment. That's, I definitely can't help them all, but I'd like to get my teeth into it.
Yeah. Well, I've found when we talk about, the consumer market of disabled people, the purple pound, the 250 billion spending power each year, and all those stats, I think a lot of businesses can't quite comprehend how big the market is, and how could they have not noticed this before?
Okay, this is a really interesting point. One of the things I've had again and again is that there's no demand. So there's this complete missing link between supply on the one hand and demand on the other.
Yeah.
And house builders will tell me, or so it's not even some housing associations. I've spoken with top management there, and they're saying, well, but we're just not seeing it. And I'll go and have a look at their websites or their publicity, and nowhere is there anywhere to talk about accessibility or needs. And it's like, well, okay, do you know how difficult it is looking for an accessible property? Like, I'm not going to go to every company who doesn't advertise it and ask if they do it. Probably I'll be speaking to someone who doesn't understand it anyway. And it's a broken link. And so that's another part of what I do.
How do you think it can be? I know it's time, and it's maybe serendipity of like the right people at the right time as well. But like, have you got a strategy of like which kind of people you need to speak to that are more likely to connect the link that's broken?
I'm pushing on doors at the moment, and I am seeing which one's open, and that's as much as I can.
Knock on lots of doors.
Yeah, totally. But we've already had some really interesting conversations. We last year we were chatting with Rightmove, and that was a very interesting conversation, because quite often I've said, oh, why doesn't someone or some company just do X? It would be really easy to do. So I'll go and chat with X. And they'll say, okay, look, this is the complex, this is the context, and we've got all these other factors at play, which create a little bit of an issue for that.
Are they excuses, or are they?
No, it's really no, they're not. I'm thinking of two examples. One is the conversation with Rightmove, and two, weirdly, is to do with trains and access to trains, and the freight rail lobby and all sorts of other background stuff.
Yeah, of course.
And with Rightmove, everyone thinks Rightmove should do stuff. And, I was having a look at what they could do. Because if you said, okay, look, there's an accessibility filter, just, tick this box, how does that work? Because estate agents are listing the properties, not Rightmove. And how is an estate agent going to know what's accessible? And where I've seen, agency sites for holiday houses or holiday lets, that have that filter, it doesn't work. So they'll tick it, I'll go through, and then I'll say, well, and then I'll have to ring them, and I'm sure you've had the similar experience, and I say, well, what is there? Like, tell me about the bathroom. And they'll say, well, we've got a little, it's absolutely perfect, and we've got a little shower cubicle with a step up. And I'm like, okay, you know what, stop right there. Or the door you can't get into, the bathroom doors are made narrower than every other door, and you're like, why?
Are you familiar with the Common Ball that I co-founded?
Yeah, totally. You guys did a great job.
So I mean, that the thing that really cracked it was the photos, because it wasn't open to interpretation. It was, well, there's the photo, and I can see that's a wet room shower. obviously it's gone to Airbnb and they're trying to scale up every property to have that. But it's back to your point that you need every vendor on Airbnb to go and take photos and understand what is relevant.
And the right kind of photos. There's a photo for an impression, that shot of, I don't know, a laid up table, in sharp focus with the background out of focus, or there's the shot of, this is what the loo looks like. This is what, they're not glamorous photos, some of them, but they're really useful.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's a challenge. And this is where you guys did so well. My thing is, photos is one, and the other silver bullet is floor plans. Like if you can have floor plans, and floor plans works very well in sales. Like in sales properties, expect to have floor plans, but the turnover rates are slower in sales, and the kind of the figures are higher. And so for me, it's about how can we persuade all landlords to have floor plans attached to their properties. Like if they don't have to do it, they don't want to do it, but that means that there's no equality of opportunity for people with mobility or sensory requirements. And so that's part of an ongoing conversation to work out commercially, because technically it's easy. How can we do that? There's carrot, there's stick. So it's very much trying to problem solve at step back, look at the problem, really understand the context and the issues, and then try and work collaboratively to say, okay, I think we can do something here. And it's that kind of positive and collaborative approach, which I absolutely love. If I can talk to people, I've got a nice network and I see different problems, but very often I'll go to someone and say, hey, why don't you do this? And they'll say, well, I'd love to do this, but I've got that. So I'll go, oh, well, I know someone there. So, and I keep going around that whole circle and trying to solve the problem. And that can be slow burn, but it's interesting. I love doing it, and I'll happily chat to anyone.
Yeah, I mean, with my business hat, in terms of bigger scale, that's obviously hard to scale that almost intimacy and that sort of depth of discussion for every single person. Like you say, how many million did you say was without suitable housing at the moment?
So, well, the LSE figure is 1.8 million.
So like to literally get those 1.8 million people housed, to have that conversation with 1.8 million landlords or about 1.8 million properties. But it's like, I sort of think it's the start, isn't it? That it's to have those conversations, everyone is learning, and then once the sweet spot is struck, you can extrapolate and scale that sweet spot.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's continuous learning. But here's the thing about that 1.8 million is once there's a really good proof of concept out there, like other people are going to jump on that bandwagon. They're going to go, landlords are going to realize, and investors are going to realize that if you're stuck with, energy inefficient properties, once we really start understanding about the health of a house and what an unhealthy home looks like, what it does for people, especially COVID-19, look at how much time people are spending at home and the indoor
and that sort of stuff.
Say again?
I'd say there's a lot of incidents of damp and mold issues.
Yeah, big time. I mean, yes, and these things are solvable, and a lot of people want to use technology to solve it. Well, you don't necessarily need to. I know what we've done seems unconventional, but here in home we've got straw bale walls with lime render on the outside and clay plaster on the inside, and so in terms of relative humidity, it's usually more humid inside a house than it is outside. Nature wants to balance that up. So here, nature is just wicking out the moisture from our home to balance up with outside. And so we have this lovely kind of drier indoor air quality. And also we're very careful about the materials we've used so that we don't have kind of toxins off-gassing. Yeah. And, we've got kids and, we're lucky, we've thought about it, we have it. Why can't other people have that? Why can't renters have that? And why can't accessible people with accessible needs have that? Like it annoys me that, or it frustrates me that I have to accept the crappiest corner of a hotel because they know that that room will be full if that's the only accessible room. You know, I'm a father and I'm a wheelchair user. Like, you know, don't make me choose between the family room or the disabled access room.
Let you be both, because you are both.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm trying to come at property with a lot of different experience and learnings, and understand that I'm not just trying to solve my one niche. I'm trying to put everything together in a very balanced and healthy way that works for everyone.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. We have to wind down in a minute, Guy. But I mean, I could carry on chatting for hours about this. It's really, really fascinating, and it certainly got me thinking. I mean, with my marketing purple goat hat on, and I know you've said you've done lots of brand and marketing yourself. It's the key is that storytelling. Like I was thinking about when I moved to London, when I talk about being just out of uni in my early mid-20s, wanting to go clubbing and dating, like that's the part of me that will connect with others, you know, in different ways that are not disabled. But then when I say I went on Gumtree and the first flat I was going to view, I was told it was accessible, and I drove from my family home in Cambridgeshire 2 hours to get to London and find there was steps, a big flight of steps to the front door, let alone there were then steps indoors. And then I was on all sorts of agencies, estate agent websites, and no one had a clue where the stock of accessible properties were. And in essence, there probably just wasn't enough of them. And I was so desperate to move to London for my job and my general aspirations. There was I can't remember how, it must have been on Gumtree or something, but there was a guy who was renting out his spare room, even though it was a social housing, so he wasn't meant to do it. And my dad asked him, what do you do for work? And he was like, I sell herbal products. So and there was a lot of gangsters basically hanging around his house. And we got back in the car, and my dad was obviously just presuming this was an absolute no-go. But me just wanting to move to London, I was like, I think it might work, you know. And fortunately, I didn't move in there. Unfortunately, I did find somewhere that was a bit more appropriate down the road, but it was a really unnecessary, stressful slog. And I had to do 2 months of commuting to London for my job because I wasn't able to move into the property until 2 months after starting the job. So like that story, as you tell your story, is what disarms investors and landlords to get the human cost of all of this. And then you throw out the business stats and the ROI and all that. So yeah, I think it's the more storytelling, the more people are gonna buy into this, really.
Yeah, that person. I mean, you'll start. I'm mindful of the time, but you've got me onto a whole extra thing, which I'll talk another 20 minutes on. But you know, when we talk about of those stats, that 1.8 million, 39% are of working age, and half of those people, so that's 580,000. Of that, half are apparently in the top half of. Sorry. I've got the figure. 39%, sorry, are in the top half of income distribution. So the point being is housing and work are inextricably linked. And if you can't sort your housing, then getting work is really impossible.
Yeah.
So I'm having some very interesting conversations there with someone in the House of Lords about this, and he's trying to push for graduates with disabilities to fulfill their potential, and he's really mindful of that housing is one of these sticking points. And I think every city is bad. London's particularly bad, and London layers in all these other things about affordability as well. But yeah, so there's a lot of work to do. But
there is. It's exciting. I mean, I think we have a very shared, similar passion for inclusion and the social costs and the economic costs of exclusion of people, and the opportunity for everyone is so big. It's just frustrating that we can't always move it forward quite quick enough. But I'm sure over year 5, 10 years there'll be massive landmark improvements. It's just that day-to-day can feel a bit like a slog, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Great. Well, as I say, feel free to jump on some of the platforms and interact with anybody afterwards that maybe has some questions from the replay, and obviously likewise, people get in touch with Guy. Do you want to give your address again, your website?
Yep, it's accessible PRS for private rented sector.co.uk. And I think my phone number's on there and my email address. So literally call me. I'm here. Love chatting, as you can see.
Yeah.
And I know that there are other people with great ideas or great contacts or connections, whatever it is.
Yeah.
My favorite thing is to work collaboratively. I think that it always achieves a better result.
Agreed. Cool. Well, yeah, thank you, Guy. It's the first time we properly spoke on the call on this chat now, so I've really enjoyed meeting you and hearing about Leipzig and all the work you've done and what you're up to now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Martin.
All right, and I'm sure we'll be in touch, and there may be ways we can work together in the future, which would be quite exciting as well.
That would be great.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks again, Guy, and thanks everyone for watching. Hope you've enjoyed today's chat all around housing and property and many other bits and bobs around that. It's been a fascinating hour. We'll see you tomorrow for the next episode. And in the meantime, have a lovely day. Bye-bye.